Right now I'm using an Intel 13900K processor and a Geforce 4090 graphics card. That makes my PC one of the fastest gaming PCs in the world right now. This sort of opportunity doesn't come around too often, nor does it last very long, and I don't want to squander my one chance to do something really worthwhile with this amount of power. So today I'm going to go about maps in CSGO, staring at the ground to see how high my framerate can reach. Welcome to Getting High in CSGO. Judging from these components, you might think that this video would be sponsored by Intel or Nvidia, but you'd be wrong. Because this video is sponsored by NordVPN, the company that provides almost 5,650 servers in almost 60 countries. By now, you know already how VPNs work and what they can do. If not, then the link in the video's description will tell you more. But today, I'm going to talk about the other things their service provides. For instance, using MeshNet, instead of connecting to a VPN server, you can connect to another computer directly over the internet, and to access the internet from their network instead. This essentially means you can host a LAN party over the internet, meaning you don't even have the hassle of seeing your friends anymore. Incredible. NordVPN features a growing list of its own protective features to serve as a security layer between you and the internet, of which you can toggle on and off depending on what you need. There are tracking blocks, malicious site blocks, ad blocks, and even a virus scan for downloaded files. These features can be active even when you're not connected to a VPN server. And lastly, their desktop app has a sleek new user interface, which looks nice. NordVPN comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, and using the code CLICKS, you can get the 2-year deal for even more of a discount than they're already offering, and an extra month free on top of the 3 already offered, using the code CLICKS. In order to get the highest frame rates possible, the first thing you should do is to remove the frame rate cap. In Counter-Strike it used to be 300, but PCs got faster and Valve at some point upped it to 400. Just in case you wondered why you were never getting more than that. You can permanently remove it completely by going to CSGO's properties in Steam like so, and by typing in plus FPS_max 0. This will unlock the frame rate. Also make sure you don't have VSync forced on your graphics card's control panel or anything like that. You'll know if you do because your frame rate in-game will be limited to 60 or 144 or whatever refresh rate your monitor is. Although, before we embark down this road of high FPS discovery, I must warn you, do you really want to go there? Especially with energy prices rising the way they are, wouldn't you rather limit your frame rate and get sick efficiency gains instead? Hi, I'm eClicksPhilip, and I'm all about the efficiency. And I'm frankly disgusted by 3ClicksPhilip's choice of PC. Here I am, wrapped up warmly in bed, gaming on the Steam Deck for minimal power consumption and sucking at the air for my moisture requirements, while he's in there blinding himself with a monitor that's brighter than the sun. But if you are going to be gaming on a beastly setup, let me give you some tips on how to rack up high scores in-game, but not on your energy bill. So, most people know that buying a 1000-watt PSU doesn't mean it'll always consume 1000 watts. Well done. What it means is that it can provide your computer with up to 1000 watts of power, which could mean that it's consuming up to 1200 watts of power because they're not 100% efficient. But don't test that. You don't want to be running at 100% load, because PSUs tend to be most efficient at around 50%, so for that reason it's good to get one that's rated at double the power your system will be consuming. Of course, my gorgeous little Steam Deck can quite happily run CSGO, and the whole thing consumes just 25 watts of power. Meanwhile, that stinky pooey old Geforce 4090 over there is rated at 450 watts, but overclocked it can reach as high as 600 or maybe even 675 watts. That's like the energy draw of a microwave inside the computer. Or 27 Steam Decks. You don't need it. You're not good enough at the game to justify that level of power draw. So instead, cap your frame rate and drop your power consumption. I did a few tests. Uncapped, the processor and graphics card were consuming 300 watts of power. Oh no! But capping it to 500 dropped that to 180, and at 144 Hz, the graphics card was consuming just 52 watts of power and the processor 44, which is actually less than less powerful components would be. I wonder if you can help me. I have long wondered which is the most efficient way to travel at 90 miles an hour. Would it be in a more powerful car that's being exerted less, or in a less powerful car that's being fully maxed out? The correct answer is neither of those things. It's to go at 65 miles an hour in the Yaris and to annoy everybody behind you. eClicksPhilip out! Now, let's disable that frame cap and make this planet suffer. We've got to try and make the game as easy to run as possible. That means no bots. Definitely no bots. Those things suck up so much CPU power that you'd think they'd actually be decent at playing the game. You also want to remove the gun model, because every little helps. And, a little bit surprisingly, you'll also want to remove the HUD. Try it on your PC, see what sort of frame rate boost that gives you. So apparently, HUD-less flybys don't just look good, they run good as well. Run well as well. Next, you'll want to drop the settings as far as you can go. You certainly don't want to play the game at 8K high settings. That would be a foolish thing to do. Running about Dust 2 for a minute at 8K high settings, I got an average of just 307 FPS. At this high resolution, it's the Geforce 4090 that's limiting us, pumping out a meager 10 billion pixels a second. If it output that many pixels at 720p, then we'd be getting 11,000 frames a second. At that point, you definitely won't be able to blame your PC when you still lose. We obviously won't get 11,000 frames a second. But dropping the resolution will ease the load off the graphics card, making it more about how powerful the CPU is instead, for reasons I explained 6 months ago in this video. Running about Dust 2 at the low resolution of 4K scored a more acceptable result. It averaged 973 frames a second, with a 1% low of 426 and a maximum FPS of 1712, which is alright I guess. I repeated the tests at 1080p and at 720p, but the frame rate didn't go up by much. This is because, like I said, the CPU has become the bottleneck. The Intel 13900K just isn't good enough to go any faster, no matter how powerful the graphics card is that it's paired with. My best result wasn't even at the lowest resolution, it was in fact at 1080p, where I got an average of 989 FPS. Frustratingly close to 1000. But something strange was going on. In some areas, particularly around B and inside the tunnels, my footstep sounds got faster than normal, and while it could have just been the incredible frame rate I was getting, I could swear I was moving faster too, and I can confirm that I was in this example here. I wasn't sure how to confirm exactly how many frames a second is needed to trigger this speed hack, because using any value greater than 1000 in CSGO's FPS max command just seems to restrict it to 1000. Clearly, Valve never thought their game was going to run this quickly. And let's be honest, none of us did. Super high frame rates isn't really something that's widely discussed online. If you try to Google it, then you'll mostly find people complaining that their frame rate isn't fast enough. Although I did find this one person over on Reddit who cried that hitting 1250 FPS was causing their PC to stutter and to lag. This predictably attracted lots of salty comments, as well as a few other individuals who used it as an opportunity to brag about their FPS. Imagine being sad enough that you have to brag about your high frame rate online. Joke's on them, because my frame rate's even higher. I wasn't getting any lagging or stuttering though. My experience was silky smooth, albeit at a faster running speed. Does this mean I have speed hacks? I connected to an empty server that was hosting an aim map, and while I had no problem while I was facing the bulk of the map, when I turned around and stared at the wall, my FPS must have risen beyond the threshold, and I too started stuttering and lagging. I think this is because I'm moving faster than I should be, and to prevent this, the server is teleporting me back to where I should be stood instead. Poor me. So it turns out that beyond 1000 FPS, or maybe 1250, what difference does a few hundred FPS make at this point anyway, CSGO screws up and begins doing things at the wrong speeds. Have you ever heard a high-pitched buzzing or whining sound coming from your PC? And I'm not talking about that sound your teammates make when you're losing 11-3 on T-side of Inferno. No, I'm talking about a sound you might hear on a loading screen, or one that varies in pitch as you move your mouse about. If so, then it could be coil whine. This PC isn't too bad for it, thank goodness, but there are some horrifying examples of it out there, like this one here. It's where electrical wiring inside your PC physically vibrates, and it gets particularly noticeable as you reach massive frame rates. Which is exactly what I'm doing. This is supposedly fine and it shouldn't harm your PC, but that didn't stop New World from murdering fast graphics cards until they capped the frame rate on the menu screens, did it? In New World's case, Den of Geek advises that you should certainly not let your frame rate go above 60 FPS. They then suggest you set your graphics settings to low and to set your max frame rate to off. Funnily enough, these are all things that I'll be doing to try and get the highest frame rates possible. Am I concerned? Always. But not too much about this. So let's see if we can get the frame rate even higher. To be honest with you, with my computer being as aggressively CPU bottlenecked as it is, I doubt that dropping the graphics settings will make a blind bit of difference. But in the remotest, tiniest off chance the high settings also adversely affect the CPU load in some obscure way, I also ran about Dust 2 at low settings.
Let's go!
Oh look, it's faster. Who'd have thought it? About 300 FPS more, putting me over 1250 FPS a lot more of the time and into the realm of silly walks, letting me speedrun my way around Dust 2 in record time. It may not always be the case that lowest settings are always fastest, but for simplicity's sake, I'll keep all graphic settings on low from now on and will search for the highest FPS points on every map. So, time to find the highest frame rate area in CSGO. The question you'll want to ask is, how do I go about doing this scientifically? To which the answer is simple. I don't. I go around every map, looking at the wildly fluctuating framerate counter, and when that first number transcends 1 and looks particularly aggressively locked within the realm of 2, or sometimes maybe even 3, I benchmark it for 5 seconds to get an average framerate for that region. You quickly learn you can rule out 99% of every map through common sense, and that 1% that's left is all those featureless looking walls in the outmost corners of the map, of which every map has somewhere between 3 and 5 of them which are worth benchmarking. I did have a segment in this video where I investigated a weird anomaly that would cause frame rates to fixate around particular numbers like 1024 and 2048, and more curiously, other numbers like 819 and 1365. Unfortunately, I never figured out what caused this anomaly to occur, nor what those numbers meant, but a Google search yielded a single journal that featured all these numbers in a row, so there's some sort of pattern going on here. I was really curious about it and investigated this thing for the best part of 2 days, but the more I did, the more questions I had, and I escaped that rabbit hole before going too deeply. But just so you know, if your frame rate seems to plateau at a particular number, that isn't a hard limit within Counter-Strike, but probably just this weird number anomaly thing occurring. Right, highest frame rate regions. What did I learn from testing every corner on every different CSGO map? Turns out I did learn some interesting things from doing this. For a start, you can forget about the danger zone maps. It sounds obvious, because they always run the slowest, but when all the game's having to render is that dull, featureless room that you find yourself in, why should it matter what else is in the level? Turns out it still does matter, a lot, so while the CPU might not be rendering everything else on the map, it knows that stuff exists, and that alone is enough to slow it down more for some reason. So first conclusion reached, the smaller the map, the better. Secondly, even on the easy to run maps, the easiest spots were almost always on the outside walls facing away from the bulk of the map, probably for similar reasons as the ones I just detailed. What's in the 3D skybox also seems to matter. Now Vertigo has an especially detailed one of these, and looking down anywhere in the map yielded a significantly lower frame rate than looking up did. So rule that stuff out as well. And lastly, you can forget about areas with particles like the outdoor regions of Office and Militia. All in all, this is all fairly common sense stuff, but what surprised me was how much of an impact all this still had on my setup. Anyway, I tested every map in the game, even the ones you forgot existed like St. Mark, and these were my results, after selecting the highest average and maximum frame rate achieved on every map. Take all of these with an enormous pinch of salt, mind. I tested some of these areas multiple times and got results several hundred frames different every time. I suppose that when you're dealing with thousands of frames a second on the most technologically advanced components ever made, stuff is always happening to change your result depending on your component's temperatures, the game's tick rate, fluctuations in electrical components, which direction your feet are pointing, and whether or not you brushed your teeth this morning. But what you're gonna do. Unsurprisingly, it's the oldest and smallest maps in the game which get the highest frame rates, though honourable mention to Agency for somehow beating every other large map in the game, and that's despite its complicated skybox. I suppose that Safe House is the winner here since I got the highest result on it, though I think you could get a great result from any of these top maps, provided it's a good day and that your feet are pointing in the right direction. Just avoid Ancient, which was the slowest of all the maps tested, even more so than the Danger Zone ones. But that being said, it did run higher settings faster than Dust 2 did, so it's not all bad. But we're not looking for lowest frame rates here. And I scored the highest maximum frame rate on Baggage, which was unfortunately the first I tested, and so I remained unimpressed for the rest of the day's testing, slipping into a mild depression by the early afternoon. I don't like maximum frame rate for the same reason I dislike minimums. All it takes is for a slight blip in your processing power, or for your left foot to be pointed in the wrong direction, and suddenly one of the few benchmarking numbers that people will eventually see is wildly different from the rest of your experience with it. So while the maximum frame rate will be the one that everybody remembers from this video, just know I don't like it. I will now pull out all the stops and will test Safe House and Baggage to see how high I can get their frame rates. First thing to go is the frame rate counter, which itself is probably dropping these scores a bit. I will be relying on frame views and visible counting to track these numbers, which I've been using throughout this video already, so no problem there. And next, I'll download some dodgy FPS boosting config that does everything it can to make CSGO look even worse than it does already. And then, of course, we've got to ask, how far should we go? Because believe me, I can go a long way. I can disable the skybox, I can disable the lighting, I can disable the textures, and even the ground. At some point though, this stops being CSGO. This is where I drew the line. For some, I may have gone too far already. For others, I went too far about 10 minutes ago. While others are probably asking why I haven't gone further by creating my own map with nothing in it. But whatever. I tested the highest frame rate areas in Safe House and Baggage again, being sure to get lots of benchmarks in the same areas so I could pick the highest. And this was the highest average spot I got, 2418 FPS average. But baggage remained the best for getting maximum frames per second, and for a brief moment in this particular spot, I scored 4,486 frames a second. Impressed? You better be, for this is what peak performance looks like. So what is the maximum frame rate achievable in CSGO? It's hard to say, for even those of you on a potato of a PC can score thousands of frames a second by playing a demo file and by slowing it down. The game multiplies your frames a second by how much it's being slowed down by. But that's cheating! But maybe so is disabling the HUD. Maybe so is testing on an empty server where there's no sort of game being played. Maybe testing on unreleased hardware is cheating. How am I supposed to know? But I think it's safe to say that it's the Intel 3900K processor that is determining my maximum frame rate here. I could have overclocked it, but it is already hitting 5.8 GHz, so I really don't see the point when modern processors are so good at boosting themselves as far as your cooling solution will allow them to. If I wanted better performance, I'd probably have to switch to liquid cooling, or liquid nitrogen. And an exorcism. It might be easier just to switch to faster RAM instead. Further afield, AMD's Ryzen 7000 series of processor is pretty fast too. Depending on the benchmark you use, it might even be ahead of the 3900K in CSGO. But beyond that, we may be waiting on AMD to combine their X3D memory with the 7000 series of processors, which, depending on the game, can sometimes dramatically boost performance. That will likely come out sometime next year. But maybe, rather than asking how fast we can run CSGO, we should instead be asking ourselves, how fast is fast enough?